Europe when I was 14 and 15, and then moved back to New Jersey, and then lived there until I went to UCLA for my master's degree, and that introduced me to California. But then my former wife lived in, she got a job with IBM in New York, and so we moved to New York, did my doctorate at NYU, and lived in New York until about 1978 when we were parted ways, and I moved back to, I then started exploring California and moved to San Diego.
I have a master's from UCLA too.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
What led to your interest in doing your dissertation on feminist issues or gender issues? What about your background led to that?
I was teaching political science at Rutgers University, and the women's movement service. This is 1969, 68, and I would bring up the politics of the women's movement, and my students were telling me, Warren, when you speak about the women's movement, you have fire in your belly. You're just so fascinated by it, and such an advocate. You should really. And you're doing your dissertation on grants and AIDS, you should change your dissertation topic and do it on something with the women's movement. And so I approached my dissertation committee, and they said the women's movement was just a fad and it wasn't worthy of my taking up. And I said, I don't agree with that. I think that the women's movement is part of an evolutionary shift. That we've, for the developed countries for the first time have freedoms to have children, to have men and women play different roles than the rigid roles of the past, and that there's going to be an evolutionary shift here, and the women's movement is the first part of it. And they said, well, the men, don't they have the power, and wouldn't they really be the ones to be the first ones to take advantage of any evolutionary shift? And I said, no, men are designed to protect women. When women ask for something, we respond. We'll give our lives to make sure what women ask for, they get. They'll be the first ones, and it will, in fact, be a long time before men really make that same evolutionary shift, because we're designed never to complain about ourselves, but only complain when when we can protect somebody else. And so they said, all right, now I have to acknowledge I had just been appointed assistant to the president of NYU, and so now the people who were my dissertation committee were a little bit more, let's say, flexible with me than they might otherwise have been. So they sort of shrugged their shoulders and rolled their eyes and said, all right, if that's what you want to do. And so then I changed my dissertation topic to the politics of the women's movement. And then that got me involved with NOW. And then NOW was about ready to kick men out because they were interfering with the discussions that women were having, particularly during the once-a-month consciousness-raising meetings that they had. And so they said that they had made a deal. And the deal was that if they could get me to form men's groups and keep the men away from the women during the consciousness-raising groups, they would keep men involved. And so I, not knowing what I was doing, I tried it out. And it worked really well. And everybody was happy. The men were happy. The women were happy. And so they then asked me to be, if I would run for the board of directors of NOW in New York City. And I said yes. And for 3 years, I was elected to the board of NOW. And then my former wife became a White House fellow. We moved to Washington, D.C. And I was the wife of a fellow, so to speak. And so she, when we moved there, I left NOW. And then I started realizing that there was a lot of issues that were happening, that men were not changing their gender roles. They were just responding to women. And I felt that there was a need for men to make evolutionary shifts in their gender roles as well. And so I began to take more and more, and I felt that nobody was looking at that. And the only people that were looking at that were people who were male feminists, and they were sort of doing it from the feminist perspective, but they really weren't looking at it from a broad spectrum of male perspectives, from more liberal males like myself to more conservative males, nor were they looking at what was happening with conservative women. And so I was starting to see that there was a need for a balance. And then I put my life's work more into that, carving that out. So that's a
How did
big.
you narrow your dissertation? Because the politics of the women's movement is really broad.
Yes, I looked at the political implications of the women's movement based on its ability to affect a change in men's behavior, and did an extensive study of how of men's attitude changed and whether it happened when confronted with or presented when women's issues were presented to them, and then whether their behavior actually changed. And that was based on things that I did that happened in the men's groups that I created, and what actual changes in behavior happened as opposed to just theoretical ideas or agreement. And so,
What did you find did in fact change their behavior, make them more egalitarian?
mostly seeing that it was in their interest, and then also seeing that women, feeling that very protective of women, wanting women to. We almost all the people I surveyed knew women who had the potential for succeeding at work, or were very gifted in one way or the other, and they didn't want to live in a world where women were being held back. And so those, and so that, and the men in the men's groups, we were extremely sensitive, I think, to, and other men were to what women wanted, and we were wanting what women wanted. And then in the men's groups, it was also often we were aware that when women were interested in earning money, let's say, that put less pressure on men to have to earn the money. That led to us having to kowtow to our bosses and do jobs that we didn't like, because they were paid more than jobs that were less. As a rule, the less fulfilling the work, the more it pays. The more fulfilling the work, the less it pays, because the more fulfilling the work, the more people want to do it. Therefore, the greater the supply in relation to the demand.
Right. Your mother died when your brother was only 11, Wayne, and so your father became the primary parent until he remarried. So I'm wondering how that shaped your attitude towards parenting.
Well, at that point, when my mom died, I was already married, and to my former wife named Ursi, and so I did know that my father was, actively involved, and I lived in New York, and they lived in New Jersey, and I saw my father become a different person. I saw him, when I was growing up, he was very much oriented toward, be filled with responsibility. There was nothing for which I did not have to be accountable. He was very heavy on the discipline. There was almost never a day I had a vacation day. I always, had to always expected during vacations to work working in the post office, working as a caddy, that type of thing. And so I was very, he was very discipline oriented, and making sure that I was responsibility and accountability oriented. There was no such thing as an excuse. Why didn't you do it the way you should do it? I don't want to hear excuses. I want to see the change in behavior. But when my brother was born, or when he took over the parenting of my brother, he moved more to wanting to be a friend to my brother, and that created the problems that a parent and a child who are friends. He was in a sense wanting to prove how much of a connection and how good a father he could be and stuff like that. And he moved in the direction that he would have, he didn't really approve of until he actually got involved as the primary parent. And so my brother was much more, rebellious and took more risks and things like that. And eventually he was killed when he was a very good skier, and he was killed in an avalanche in the Grand Tetons in Wyoming when he was at the University of Utah. And so that was very, so it was very challenging for me to lose my mother when I was 22, and then lose my brother, just not too much longer later.
Wow, I'm sorry. Let's look at your career path. You were a professor, and then you've managed to make your living as a writer and a speaker. I think that's very unusual.
It is very unusual. In fact, it's and a little bit amusing too. I only taught 1 year as a professor at 1 year full time at Brooklyn College in the Department of Sociology, and then another year full time at Rutgers University. And all my other appointments were adjunct appointments to the University of California, San Diego, and the School of Medicine and places like that. But except for 2 years, yes, I did make my living. I've made my living as a writer and as a speaker, and mostly from the speaking, which paid a lot more than the writing. As you know, but the writing leads to the speaking, and so yes, it's been a balancing act. It was pretty easy at the beginning because I was sort of the leading male spokesperson for women's issues in the world, and that really that led to a huge number of speaking engagements that paid very substantially at the time. I invested that money and have basically, and that helped to supply some flexibility for me in my life to be able to say things about the importance of fathers, for example, and the importance of boys' issues and men's issues, that if I were raising 3 or 4 children and supporting a wife, I probably would not have had the freedom to make those decisions, to speak up as truthfully as I've had the luxury of being able to do.
I think you coined the term lace curtain, where you explain that after you became not just a feminist spokesperson, but a gender liberation, gender evolution spokesperson, then you didn't have the same kind of calls to come on Oprah or shows like that.
Yes. In fact, the first time I was invited to the Oprah show 5 times, and 3 times I was able to. Once I recommended somebody else, and another time I was taking my father up to Ireland. So I was on the show 3 times. But the next time that they asked me to participate, I did explain to the producer, that I had more complex views than just feminist views, and that I mostly agreed with most of what feminists were doing, but I also felt that there were, boys and men's issues and fathers' issues and things like that needed to be integrated into the gender transition, and that basically I was not a woman's, I was opposed to a women's movement demonizing men or a men's movement demonizing women, that I was in favor of a gender transition movement, or a gender liberation movement, actually, in which both sexes became free from the rigid roles of the past and had more freedom of roles in the future. That was always my goal, and I thought it was Betty Friedan's goal, because she wrote a book called The Second Stage, in which she said pretty much exactly that as well. And so and I could feel the energy of the producer at the Oprah Winfrey show just freeze, and she very quickly said, "Thank you very much, Doc. Really nice talking with you," and never heard from the Oprah Winfrey show again. And that happened. I was constantly on the Today Show and the Phil Donahue show, and all these, everything I wrote for the New York Times had been all the op-eds had been published that I had written, except for the op-eds that I wrote too long, and then they published them as 2 op-eds rather than 1. And so it was that type of thing. But then once I started integrating compassion for boys and men, I had refusal after refusal after refusal. And about the last 35 op-eds that I've written for the New York Times, only 1 has been published, and that was a result of a contact with somebody at the New York Times.
I don't really understand that, because women have husbands and brothers and sons, and it's not like we're split in these different segregated worlds. So why, it seems so obvious that everyone benefits if we have flexibility and androgynous options available to us. So what were they, there must be, they were afraid of something. What were they afraid of?
Yes, they were afraid. Well, first of all, I think it's obvious also. And when people read The Myth of Male Power or the Boy Crisis book, there's 2 things that they usually say. I'm never sure whether I'm reading something that's totally revolutionary or totally obvious. Sort of like that. It's like the fish is the last one to know that were swimming in the ocean. And so, okay, back to your basic question, what were they afraid of? And what they were afraid of is from the point of view of many feminists. We live in a world, and we live in a world dominated by a patriarchy, in which men made the rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And the proof of that is look around us. The top corporate leaders are men. The top religious leaders are men. Even people who claim to be religious and spiritual, they still have a hierarchy, and it's almost all men at the top. And then, of course, there's the top politicians that are almost all men. So, Warren, isn't it obvious to you that men have been keeping women in their place? And why are you saying anything about men having the rights to? We don't even want to hear the word men's rights. Men's already have the rights. They make the laws. They make the rules. If they wanted anything to be changed, they could change it. They have all the power. And so there was that type of reflexive blindness to, wait a minute, both sexes had rigid roles, but men make more work for the same, make more money for the same work. Isn't that perfectly obvious discrimination? Actually, it's more complex than that, I would say. It's not that men make more money than women, and it's not for the same work. It's that dads make more money than moms do, and when dads and men and women become dads and moms, they take a different attitude toward the work. And then I'd have to explain that, but I never got that far because of the first comments that I just made, that the world so obviously on the surface looked like it was a world that which men had all the rights, and because they were measuring power by the access to things like more money or more status, and no one saw that the way men saw power is that they felt obligated to earn money that often their families spent while they often died sooner, and that when a man had passion for being an elementary school teacher and he had children, he had to give up that job as an elementary school teacher. He often felt in order to be able to earn twice as much money as a principal or superintendent of schools, so he began climbing the education ladder. And so then the feminists looked at that and said, see, yes, women are more of the elementary school teachers, but look at the men. They dominate the system. They're the superintendents of schools. But we as feminists never looked at that as, wait a minute, this is what men, this was part of the male obligation and expectation that when he got married and had children, not got married, but had children, that then he would stop thinking about himself and what he wanted to do and what was his passion, which is maybe being that elementary school teacher. And he's worried about earning more money doing a job he hated, oftentimes like being an administrator that most people hate compared to teaching. And then when he was successful at it, he was then accused of dominating the school system and having all the power. But from his internal experience, he felt he had given up the glint in his eye. He had given up his passion in order to be able to provide opportunities for his wife and his children that he never had himself. And so I started seeing this again and again, and how little it was understood. And as I interviewed men and formed men's groups, I would hear, for example, a cab driver in Santa Cruz said to me, this was just before the Uber began taking over, he said that he had spent 70 hours a week all his life driving a cab, and hoping against all hopes that his daughter would be the first person in their family to go to college. And he was so happy when she did, and it made him feel like his sacrifices of driving that cab all his life were worthwhile finally. And she came back on the first break, I think it was Thanksgiving, and she explained to him how he had white male, actually he was Hispanic, but it was male privilege, and that he was part of an oppressor group, and that she wanted him to know that he knew that she knew that, and he said, like, my heart was broken, like she had I felt like all the efforts I had made to have her go to college had turned against me. I felt like I was not being appreciated appreciated for any of that because I earned more money than our mom did. Her mom did. I was considered to be the one to be the oppressor. I had special privileges and so on. And she said, I just I started giving up on life, and I started getting depressed, and I cut back to driving cabs 30 hours a week with a sort of finger toward you, like if this is what you think of, I'm doing that for, I'm not going to be doing it. And he said I also stopped voting Democratic because I felt that the Democratic Party was sort of like they were supporting all this feminist stuff and this women's stuff that was making me into the enemy. And he said, I loved it that my daughter had this great opportunity. I hated it that I became the enemy in the process.
Oh, yes. Do you think it might be more fair to say that capitalism is the cause of this kind of hierarchical system that keeps men and women in these stereotype roles because it fits the capitalist system rather than patriarchy outside of the economic system?
Capitalism is complex because capitalism creates enough economic opportunity. So almost all the there's 53 nations that 53 largest developed nations. They basically have various degrees of capitalism, and so capitalism creates greater amounts of income for the society. The greater amounts of income allow people to have more freedom, freedom to be able to divorce, freedom to be able to have children without being married. They didn't have to have such rigid rules to make sure that everybody was surviving. And the more capable a family is of surviving, the more the children tend to go to things like college. And then the more they go to college and have opportunities, the more they move away, the more the family breaks apart, the more freedom is put. So capitalism creates economic power to a greater degree, which creates freedom. The freedom then creates the freedom to divorce and have children without being married. That freedom often leads to children not having the boundary enforcement and therefore the postponed gratification that leads to having to be successful. And so boys in particular that don't have their fathers are by far and away the prime components of the boy crisis. I often say that the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. That was not something I went into thinking, but I went into when I did the research for the boy crisis. I had 10 causes of the boy crisis that I had outlined, and I found over and over again that the boy crisis, the most important cause by a long shot, was dad deprivation. And when boys in particular don't have their dad, they don't have a role model to channel their testosterone and to discipline their testosterone into productive types of ways, and they tend to have it go into sort of random ways, or they feel listless, they feel without purpose, and they often just start rebelling and becoming coercive. And so almost about 90% of your mass shooters are dad-deprived boys. Your prisoners are almost all dad-deprived males. Your ISIS recruits are dad-deprived males and females, but a 9 to 1 ratio males to females. And so you find all sorts of destructive behaviors among particularly boys that don't have fathers. And girls have different types of developmental problems that aren't just, and most of them are also the same, but they're not nearly as intensely challenged as boys without fathers are. And so capitalism tends to lead to this freedom, and this freedom leads to the breakdown oftentimes of the family. And the breakdown of the family often leads to fathers being less involved in the family. And fathers being less involved in the family creates developmental problems for both girls and boys in 50 plus different areas. I discovered when I did the research for the boy crisis. But those areas are more potently negative for boys than for girls.
So you have a formula that in developed countries there's more freedom economically to divorce, and the root of divorce is lack of communication skills and how to express your criticisms in a way that's constructive. And then that leads to boys not having access to their fathers, especially because there's not enough predisposition in states to say the preferred mode should be joint physical and shared custody.
Yes.
And so then you say that the father's gift is they teach how to have self-discipline, how to set boundaries, how to take risks in a constructive way. They push kids in a different ways than mothers do, and kids need both. They don't need one or the other, but need both. And we know that babies light up when their dads come in the room because the dads throw them around and play with them, and they are soothed by their moms. So there's a place for both.
Not only is there a place for both are necessary. The children that do best are the ones that have what I call checks and balance parenting, where the mother and father do have different approaches and they work them through. And ideally, they will communicate well enough so that children can see them working through their differences, so they'll know that when they're married or they have a partner and they have differences with their partner, they know how to work those differences through. Yeah.
Right.
First of all, I really want to acknowledge your statement of that, your restatement of what I said was really right on target, and so I really appreciate that.
Are you finding any movement
do you know how to take a compliment?
Not very well, obviously. I just brush that aside. Busted.
Whoops.
Kentucky, I know, is a leader in terms of custody arrangements. Are you finding that there's a movement towards recognizing the need for dads after divorce, or is it being retrenched? What's the current status of that?
Yes. So what I found in doing the research for the boy crisis, that if there's a divorce, that there are 4 must-dos if you want your children to have a life that is close to what it would be in an intact family. And the 4 must-dos, the first of them and the most important, is that the children have about an equal amount of time with mom and dad. The number 2 is that the dad and mom live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other, so that children don't have to forfeit activities like soccer practice or birthdays of their best friend, and have resentment toward the parent that lives too far away to be able to get back for that party, for that soccer practice, etc. Number 3 is that the children are not able to detect any bad mouthing or negative body language about the parent that's not around.
Let me just interrupt and say that I did a book called Kids Advice to Kids, How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce. And what the kids said is if the parents were fighting openly, they were glad they got divorced. And what was most bothersome if the kids were in the middle of the fighting and the conflict.
Absolutely. The kids feel, I mean, I would say probably if not the biggest, one of the biggest forms of child abuse is bad-mouthing the other parent. And here's why, in case somebody just hears those as abstractions.
Because that's half of me, is my other parent.
That's exactly right. That you just summarized the core. The boy or the girl, let's say it's the boy is looking in the mirror and he sees his father's body language and his father's nose and eyes and stuff like that. But his father, he is told, is a narcissist and irresponsible and a liar. And he's saying, that half of him is seeing that father in the mirror and fearing that maybe he's a narcissist, maybe he's a liar, maybe he's irresponsible. Certainly there are examples of that in every child's life to, quote, prove that or make you fearful of that. But he can't talk to his dad about it because his dad will get furious at mom, and that will only increase the instability that he's experiencing. Can't talk to his mom about it for the same reason in reverse. So he has to keep it to himself. And he's fearing what he may become and be. And the daughter the same way. Both children, it increases their feelings of instability and insecurity. And so the bad mouthing is just, if you're a parent that's done this or doing this, not only stop doing it, but also reverse the process. Apologize and start sharing things from the mother's point of view or the father's point of view in front of the children, the absent parents' point of view. When your children are mad at the other parent, don't reward them for that. Hear them, listen to them, share with them what you understand their grief is about that, but also take a little bit of time to share mom's perspective or dad's perspective.
I think that's really important. And I would also add to your list of standards, in my 50-50 parenting and 50-50 marriage books, they said that women tend to have different standards sometimes, and then they criticize the man. So the man feels like, why should I clean off the counter if she's upset because I didn't clean under the canisters, or I let the kid climb the tree, or whatever. So I think you have to come to the point of, when you're on, I keep my mouth shut, unless I think the child is in danger.
Yes, absolutely. And it's and if you do think the child's in danger, then sort of So first of all, I want to make sure that it's really clear that no parent is to blame on this at this point in history, because mothers can't hear what dads don't say. Dads don't speak up about these issues. Dads can't speak up about these issues because parenting magazines and books on parenting do not explain the value. For example, it do not explain why roughhousing, the way dads tend to do it, usually leads to children having more empathy. I mean, can you imagine a man saying, I want to roughhouse with the kids because that'll give them more empathy? I mean, it sounds so counterintuitive. And A, and B, have you ever heard a dad say that to a mom? Is the science there to prove that that's true? Yes, but no dad knows how and why, or even that it is true. It also leads, the roughhousing, for example, to a greater ability of the children to make distinctions between what is aggressive and what is assertive. It also teaches the children the way that dads do it, to have postponed gratification, to not push their sister or brother aside in order to win the wrestling match, if they want to continue the roughhousing. But that's all because dads tend to, when the roughhousing gets too rough and leads to somebody being hurt, dads will usually say some version of, you need to do this differently in this way. Pushing your daughter, pushing your sister aside, or sticking your elbow in your brother's eye, that is not okay. And if you do that again, we'll stop the roughhousing. And then dads, the next time, and the kids will do it again, because they've only heard, because an admonition in words does not compete with the excitement of the experience of winning when your emotional intelligence disappears, when you're under fire and you're really wanting to do the best you can to win the battle. But when the roughhousing stops as a result of the children transgressing, thinking about their sisters' or brothers' needs, that's when it has an impact. Because then the next time the dad says the roughhousing will stop again, if you violate these understandings of the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness, or you don't have empathy for your sisters' or brothers' needs, then the children know, I can't do that elbow. I can't do that pushing out at that rough way, because dad won't tolerate excuses. He'll just stop the roughhousing, and then I've lost what I really want. So what's happening there is also the children are learning postponed gratification. They're learning that they would rather push their sister or brother aside to win there, but if they're going to get what they really want, the roughhousing, they're going to have to postpone the gratification of pushing pushing their brother or sister aside and winning immediately. And postponed gratification is the single biggest predictor of success or failure.
Wow.
And so and this and succeeding leads to both, and especially succeeding in social skills, like knowing that difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness, is what leads to children having friends and children feeling boosted by the opinions of others when they succeed, and having the discipline that Dad just created to make sure that they didn't get what they wanted without doing what they needed to do is part of the discipline that boy will get to be a basketball player or an actor or a musician, or the girl will get to be a gymnast or whatever. Well, that discipline is absolutely crucial. Moms are very good at identifying a child's gifts. They're very good at encouraging the gifts. They're very good at telling the children, don't put your elbow in your sister or brother's eyes in order to win. But when the child repeats that, moms tend to repeat their admonition, and the children, as a rule, don't pay as high a price for ignoring the admonition. And dads, sometimes moms feel, well, first of all, they'll feel the roughhousing is likely to lead to somebody being hurt, and the mom is only about 99% likely to be correct. Usually, somebody does get hurt eventually with the roughhousing, but dad uses that hurt to be able to say, that's the reason why this behavior needs to change, and if you don't change it, that's the end of the joy you're going to get from the roller coaster of roughhousing and things like that. Now, in about 9 different areas, that's somewhat of a metaphor for the difference between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting, and the children get the best of both when. So, for example, the mom says some version of, sweetie, I know you want to climb the tree, but you're too young, you're too likely to fall. And dad says, yeah, you can climb the tree, but be careful. And mom says, be careful. He'll get carried away, and she or he could fall. That's a hard ground underneath. You could, how will you feel if that child gets a concussion or is killed? And dad says, good point. And then they go back and forth, and dad accuses mom of being too overprotective. Mom accuses dad of being too careless. But they may negotiate a difference, like the child can climb the tree, but not above this level, not on these branches. But you've got to be out there to monitor it, and you've got to be out there to monitor it by standing underneath the tree. So if the child does fall, you can cushion the fall. And by the way, don't get caught up with your iPhone. In fact, give me that iPhone so you don't get distracted.
I want to add a word about roughhousing. I think it's empowering to kids, because I know my brother and we would each take one of my dad's legs, and we would try to make him fall down and do the splits. And then he would fall on top of us and squish us, and we'd yell and scream. But I think that was empowering to think that we could take on my dad. Yes. And that we could engage in this kind. And also, it was his way of having contact with us, because he wasn't that verbally demonstrative. So having this kind of physical contact was a way of communicating.
Absolutely. And it leads to girls understanding that males can have physical contact with you without it having to translate into sex.
That's important.
And it allows both kids to see that they have this roller coaster opportunity. On the one hand, they're having this enormous excitement. On the other hand, the roller coaster is designed to keep them safe. And this is just a wonderful connection, and we don't even know all this. We know from studies of rats by Panskets that they have very sophisticated systems of roughhousing with their kids, and that the young rats that have the roughhousing do much better, live longer, healthier, seem to be emotionally connected in ways that let them succeed in the rat community, so to speak. much better than the rats that don't have this. And so this is, and we don't even know it's hard to describe fully all of the learning experiences and emotional growth that we get from things like roughhousing. And dads don't explain it either. They don't even know it. They just do it. That's their style. And that's what I hope, if anyone reads any part of the Boy Crisis book, just read those differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting, and the portions of the book that talk about how to communicate about these differences so your partner can hear them.
I want to go back to that question of custody after divorce. We know the divorce rate is declining, the marriage rate is declining, but still maybe 40% of marriages will end in divorce. So it's got to be addressed. So tell us, what's the trend in terms of states mandating you should favor joint physical and legal custody?
Yes, and I will answer that directly, and then just to add that there's one other huge group that wasn't there before. Marriage rates are going down, but 53% of women under 30 who have children without being married. Many times they do live with a male, but many times they don't even know who the male is. The children don't know who the male is, and so on. But if the mother does know who the male is and they haven't been married, and she wants the children, and the dad is having to fight for the children, and she has the right to children, that's another huge component of that. Overall, 42% of births occur to mothers who are not married. The 53% figure is for women under 30. So we have this huge group, numbers of people where we do know who the mother and father is, and where the father is fighting to be involved. And so the fathers almost always want, like the research that I've done, as I said, finds that children do best when they have both parents. So technically speaking, since I advocate for that, I should get equal numbers of calls from mothers and dads saying that the other parent is preventing that from happening. In fact, I've worked for maybe more than 100 parents who wanted equal involvement with their children, who were being prevented from having it, and all 100 plus are males, and so are fathers. And so what's happening around the country is that very slowly progress is being made. Now, I define progress as equal protection, equal parenting laws, equal shared parenting laws, where the assumption is that unless there is a specific reason why the mother or father is abusive, or taking the children on joy rides without putting them in protective seats or something along those lines, that the initial assumption is the default place is equal amounts of time for both parents, unless one proves the opposite. Now, most judges agree that that's what they would like to see, male and female judges. However, the most frequent thing that happens, in at least the cases that I've handled, is that the mother says that she does not want that to happen, that she knows what's best for the child. She's met that oftentimes she has arguments where the husband calls her names or things like that. She fears, doesn't want to be, doesn't desire to be in a lot of contact with her child. She's maybe met a new man. She feels she has a better relationship with that man. She wants to drop the mistakes of the past, move out of state where that man is going to relocate for a job, and the father is welcome to visit anytime in West Virginia from their base in Ohio, or their base in Wisconsin or California. And so, and the father says, this is going to leave me maybe with 2 or 3 days a month with the children, and that doesn't seem right for the children. I'm going to miss the kids are going to miss me, etc. The mother says the children will have a stepfather. He's a lot better actually than you are, and I love him, so they won't see me fighting as much as we fought, and so it's going to be better for the kids. And so then the judge goes, oh boy. So if the mother uses the word fear, I'm fear of his anger. I'm afraid of his physical abuse. Every lawyer will tell, almost every lawyer will tell the female that if you use that word in court, it will lead the judge to be afraid to say that there should be equal parenting, because if he's only wrong 1 out of 100 times, that could be the end of his career. And so the judge is in a tough position because of that type of fear, and the father then ends up having to pay. I'd say the average father that I deal with has to pay $150,000 to $200,000 to fight all this process, which means, of course, it doesn't take much thinking to see that means we're talking about maybe 1/2 of 1% of fathers who are both successful enough to be able to afford that, and also the successful men aren't always the most nurturing men. So the people who call me have to be this combination of successful enough to be able to afford the whole process, combined with caring enough and nurturing enough to be able to want to be more involved with the children, as opposed to just paying the bill out of their success. And so now is the progress in this, when the situation gets down to this, which is the normal situation, is that being made by laws that say the default position is equal amount of involvement for both parents? The answer is yes. A little bit of progress is being made. The other side of that coin is there's only 2 states in the entire country that make that the primary, the default position.
Kentucky and California?
No, Kentucky and Arkansas. Arkansas only in the last few weeks. And so California, there are many judges who feel that way, but it's not the state law that they need to. You'll sometimes see state laws saying the parents should have equal decision-making rights or equal custody, but it's not. But unless the custody is defined as equal physical custody, as opposed to equal decision-making, legal custody, those are huge differences. Legal custody means the dad can sort of have input into the medical problems or school decision problems and things like that. But physical custody means approximately an equal amount of time with both father and mother, and that the degree to which there's a gap between the legal community and the psychological community is that Rick Warshak has done. He interviewed and worked with 100 psychologists and researchers on this issue, who were the best among the best in the country, and asked them what their perspectives were. And out of 100 agreed in what ended up being called a consensus report that the closer to 50-50 that the children got with the parents, the better the children did. And that the children who had less than 35% had significant problems. And then the closer you got between 35% and 50%, there was greater and greater increase. And he and William Fabricus, were among the main finders of that, but every single one of the other 98 researchers and therapists found that to be true. And that may seem remarkable to you, but it's a lot more remarkable than it really appears to be, because you and I know as academics, you can't get 2 academics to agree on almost anything, no less 100 to have a consensus about any one thing. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you and I both know what we're talking about.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said about your father really taught you there's no excuses, you've got to be tough, you've got to be disciplined. I'm interested in how we train men to be men. So in 2 recent interviews that I did for this book on men in their early 20s, they both said that around middle school they got a lot of injunctions about being a boy means you don't do this. And they didn't exactly spell it out, but I think it means you don't act like a girl. You're not a sissy. You don't cry. And I was surprised that even with young men, they're still getting this narrow range of expression. A lot of fear about to be a man means I'm afraid to be seen as unmanly is feminine. Do you see any changes? How old is your grandson, for example?
My grandson is now 3.5, going on 4. He'll be 4 on June 14th, right? And yes, and no, there's more flexibility now, certainly, than there was when I was growing up. But for boys, and yet there's still a huge amount of pressure to not cry, to be a man. Now, this is not so true among boys raised by single moms. They are oftentimes valued by the single moms for their creativity, their sensitivity, their warmth. Not necessarily, though, they're valued for their empathy, but they oftentimes don't end up becoming empathetic, interestingly enough, because oftentimes the mother, in being so empathetic to every dimension of the child's feelings, is helping the child focus on his or her feelings as being the feelings that count. And empathy doesn't come from thinking that your feelings are the only feelings that count. And so often children raised by dads are more likely to, or dads and moms together, are more likely to be empathetic because they're forced to think about somebody other than themselves. So you have more sensitivity in the boys raised by mothers, more permission to be feminine, more permission to not play with guns, or encouragement not to play with guns, things like that. So the boys are more rounded in that way, but they're usually not more rounded in terms of having taking risks, being able to just not cry but tough it out. They don't have the training to have to do the postponed gratification, no matter what they really want to do immediately. And so we're at a place in history now, evolutionary history, where boys are caught. There's almost two groups of boys, and the boys raised by single moms are much more likely to not be as disciplined, to drop out of high school, to be unemployed in their 20s, which boys that drop out of high school, more than 20% are unemployed in their 20s. And this is 20% is before COVID statistics, when the average statistic in the United States was 3.4% unemployment. And so these types of more likely to be failures to launch, more likely to be suicidal, more likely to be depressed, more likely to take drugs, more likely to be addicted to video games, more likely to be addicted to porn. These are all the challenges faced by boys, and to a large degree girls, who do not have a significant amount of father involvement to balance the mother involvement.
You also say that boys raised by single mothers are more likely to have ADHD. Why is that?
Yes, for this reason, the boundary, and I believe, first of all, that's what I'm sure about, or much more sure about, is the outcome of more likely to have ADHD. But I'm going to give you what I believe is the reason, but no reason for any behavior that we know the outcome for is ever 100% necessarily correct. And so so, for example, a father and mother will usually do the same type of boundary setting. Mom and dad will both say, "Sweetie, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas." The children will do the same type of boundary testing. They'll try to have as few peas as possible before they have their ice cream. The difference between the dad and the mom tends to be when the children do try to have as few peas as possible. Mom will often say, "Well, I only have a few special moments with my child before he has to do homework," or something like that. Or he was bullied in school today and he's not feeling well, so I'm not going to get into a big argument over a few peas. That would be totally insensitive and the wrong value system. So I'll tell you what, sweetie, I can see that you're upset, or you're a little bit down. I'll tell you what, just today, you can have you can have your ice cream, but I'll tell you what, have this many more peas before you have the ice cream. Okay, Mom. And so the kid has half that amount of more peas. And Mom mom says, okay, he tried, so I'm going to argue over 6, 7 different peas. Not an issue. So yes, you can have more ice cream. Dad tends, on average, and sometimes these roles are reversed, to be different, and to say, excuse me, we have a deal here. The deal here is you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. I know you had a bad day in school today. I hope you hear that I really am sorry about that. But you have to learn to finish. We had a deal, and that deal means you could not have all these peas. That's okay, but then you don't get your ice cream. Oh, Dad, you're so mean. Mom isn't like that. Well, I'm your dad now, and I'm here with you, and these are my rules. Starts complaining some more, and Dad will go something like, well, you can continue complaining some more. That's okay, but then there'll be no ice cream tonight or tomorrow night. Now the boy is learning, oh, shoot, I have no option but to focus, and here's the ADHD connection. I have to focus now on doing what I need to do, finishing those peas, before I get what I want to have, the ice cream. So I have no option but to focus my attention on what I need to do. Whereas with Mom, the boy is learning, that time Mom cut back on the number of peas I needed to eat by my saying I was bullied in school, or my saying I was really down and depressed. This is the way I can manipulate Mom. So the boy is more likely to learn good tools of manipulation with the mom and not have attention focus, but attention deficit. And so statistically speaking, children, not boys, but children raised predominantly by dads, only 15% have ADHD. Children raised predominantly by moms, 30% have on average ADHD.
Wow. What do you find are the media messages to boys? The traditional one is men should be strong, silent, decision maker, problem solver, don't reveal their feelings. What would you say are the current themes that boys get, especially ones that are watching video games and on their computers all the time?
Yes. Video games, boys on video games, some of them learn a lot of life skills on video games. Others become addicted to video games and really move away from having any real human social connections. So both of those things happen. Statistically speaking, the statistics on it are very varied. Depends on who's sponsoring the study and whether the study is longitudinal enough, what the background of that study is, but the real issue that is happening for boys pretty universally is I was being interviewed on this yesterday for a documentary that's being done. I was down in the documentary film crew went down to waterfalls with me, and I was talking about the messages that boys are learning in school. And just at that moment, a boy who appeared to be like he was in the 9th grade, and in fact was in the 9th grade, was walking by on the hills. And I called up to him. I said, I'm being interviewed for a documentary. Do you have any interest about boys? Do you have any interest in joining us? And he and making some comments. And he looked a little bit, looked us over. Looked like there was some trust possibilities there. So he came down from the hill where he's on, and I interviewed him on camera. And he said he went to an all-boys school in San Francisco. And so I said, well, here's an opportunity for boys to bond and all be boys, stuff like that. And I said, well, what do you learn about boys versus girls in school? And he goes, we learn that the girls have been oppressed by the boys, and that boys have male privilege, and especially if we're white, we have white male privilege. And that he said that a couple of years ago it was pretty much male privilege, but now it's white male privilege. that's being fostered. And I said, well, who teaches you this? And he says, well, everybody. I said, do you believe this yourself? And he says, no, I see it in a more complex way. I think there's certain ways I have privilege and certain ways I don't. So I said, if you're out with he's ninth grade, so I figured he's about ready to start dating. So if you're out with a girl and you want to be romantic potentially with her, would you talk to her about the more complex ways? He said, no, I wouldn't mention this at all. What about if it came up in class and you wanted to bring up some of the more complex ways that men had obligations and things like that, not just privilege? He said, no, I definitely wouldn't bring it up in class. And so, now I didn't dig deep. I did dig deeper, but what I would have loved to have said is, how do you feel about, do you think it's healthy for you to keep all these feelings to yourself and these things to yourself? And what the boys are learning in general, and he verified all of this by my asking open-ended questions, not sort of doing lead questions, was that I asked him now in the more lead questions, I said, have you ever heard that the future is female? He said, oh, of course, all the time. And then the male privilege all the time. Have you heard about the patriarchy? He had volunteered that before I even brought it up. And he said,
toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity all over the place, yes. And now this is a boys' school. Okay, can you and the boys and girls that I've spoken to in girls' schools, not girls' schools, in co-ed schools. We have a very good co-ed school in town here in Mill Valley called Tamalpais High, and they say that this is very much the curriculum of the day. And the question I ask is, if your son is learning in ninth grade that the future is female, do you feel that inspires your son for his future? And so I'm heartbroken that we've moved to a place where you and I think, Gail, agree that when the women's movement was starting and we heard we heard women were victims, but we heard predominantly the Helena Reddy type of theme, I am woman, I am strong. And today we hear much more the theme of I am woman, I've been wronged. And the hashtag Me Too, I think, is wonderful, but it's wonderful if it were a dialogue. It is a disaster as a monologue, because as a hashtag Me Too monologue teaches us that there's only one set of victims, there's only one story that needs to be told. And I'm so happy my sister and my wife have had a chance to have had more social encouragement to tell their stories more fully, where they've been hurt and shoved aside. But I also know that having started 300 men's groups, that men have their own parallel universe of feelings, and we haven't provided permission for men to express those. And this is already the sex that doesn't know how to express feelings. We are only reinforcing the traditional stereotype of men being repressive of their feelings by not encouraging men to say, okay, what is your perspective on this? And whenever I've gone to schools where I've been asked to intervene on a date rape accusation or a sexual harassment accusation, I've always insisted on speaking to both male and female separately, and then bringing them together and facilitating their ability to hear each other. And I've not had a single case where both the male and the female haven't come out of it saying, I really forgot that I had giving those signals. But yes, I admit that I have. And that really has made me a lot more aware of, what I am doing, what I need to be accountable for and responsible for, and what are some alternatives of the way I could have intervened and prevented the trauma that I'm experiencing or repressing in the case of males from having.
What else do you see, since Americans watch so much television and kids grow up watching more TV than they are in school? What else, if they watch the ads, if they watch the sitcoms and whatever, what are they getting about what it means to be a man today?
The big thing that they're getting is that about 100% of ads that show some parent being sort of a well-meaning fool, or just a poor parent in various ways, where the product can be sold by laughing at a given parent. Almost invariably, some studies say 100%, it is the father that is looked at as the fool. And so this is not an inspiration for a man to be valued as a father, or for a woman to feel that a man has something as a father to offer that is parallel or and equal to her being offered that. And if I were to suggest one thing that we can do, we need to do in our culture today, it would be to have a father warrior program, where we are encouraging, males are wonderful and responsive when they are told they are needed. When we said Uncle Sam needs you in each generation's war, men said, if we're needed, we'll die. We'll be disposable. We'll be willing to die so others will live, especially to protect women, to protect children, protect my parents. We're willing to die to protect the country from being under Nazi rule or whatever. If you can convince me at all that this is a just war, I'm willing to die for it. And so, but we need to tell men something different today. We need to say, we need you to be involved fathers. We need women to value men as involved fathers. And we need to start that training in first grade, second grade, by developing emotional skills, communication skills, all through that are advanced and become more sophisticated with each year of school, where everybody hears everyone else's perspective on things before they argue with them. We need to put a hold for a while on debate training, and where we listen for the purpose of finding the flaw in what someone else is saying, and then being able to beat them in the debate, and listen for the purpose of finding the strength, the underlying feeling, the underlying fear in what someone is saying. We need to train our sons and daughters to understand that anger from our partner or from anyone in society, anger is almost always a vulnerabilities mask. If we start doing that, and we start encouraging our sons to be feeding the younger children in the family, recommending our sons to be babysitters, this doesn't mean feminizing our sons. It means giving our sons the option to behave in ways that are traditionally considered feminine, even as they also have the obligation and the expectation to fulfill their promises, to be accountable, to be responsible, to be disciplined, and to have postponed gratification.
You gave the example of Denmark does a really good program of teaching kids to communicate from preschool on up. And I'm thinking of a New York, I think it was city schools, I'm not sure, program called Oh Boy Babies. And there's a book about that, how the boys loved, like the third grade boys got to take care of the preschool kids, and they loved it. So those kind of programs, we have models for all these.
We do. And you're absolutely right. When I went over to speak in Scandinavia and spend some time in Denmark, and saw that they are teaching communication skills in very early years in Denmark. And there's one of the things. So and let me actually, if a single mom is listening, let me just and the first thing to do, if you want your children, and I know you want your children to grow up as good as possible. So let me, because I've talked a lot about the importance of fathers, let me assume that you will take a look at the part of the boy crisis that talks with dad-style parenting and really see what dads do that you can work with to help let the father know that he is needed for both your son and your daughter, understanding that when a man knows he's needed and why he's needed and sees that you appreciate what his contribution is, he's much, much more likely to become constructive in the world, stop drinking, stop doing things that are responsible, and come back into the family. However, if for some reason that is not possible for reasons you judge, it is very important to get your son, the most important single thing you can do for your son is to find him somebody to mentor after you found somebody to mentor him. That is, boys need good male role models and mentors, but once they have them, they grow even more rapidly when they have somebody that they're responsible for. Somebody that when they and that makes them feel like, okay, if I don't do my homework, if I take drugs, I'm not going to fulfill my role as a mentor. I'm not going to look really good to the boy that I'm saying he shouldn't take drugs and he should do his homework. How can I even be credible in saying that if I'm not doing that myself? That's the fastest way to grow a boy. It's also a fastest way to grow a boy's character is get him involved in Cub Scouts. There's really very good studies about the character development that comes from Cub Scouts. Get him involved in Boy Scouts. Yes, vet the Boy Scout leader. Get him involved in faith-based communities. Yes, vet the faith-based community leader, but make sure the faith-based community leader gets together your son with other boys his age, where there's confidential sharing of feelings and fears that the boys have with each other. That will allow your boy not to stuff his feelings and fears about his inadequacies inside of himself and cover them up with macho or masks of invulnerability, which almost no boy feels about himself, but almost every boy feels pressure to present about himself.
Before we leave media, I found a list of the foolish fathers that I thought people would be interested in. Archie Bunker and All in the Family, Homer Simpson, Al Bundy and Married with Children, Family Guy's Peter Griffin. And then this article said they think the positive dads are Eric Taylor in Friday Night Lights, Danny Tanner in Full House, Joel Graham in Parenthood, and Jay Pritchett in Modern Family. I haven't seen any of those shows, so I wonder if you think they are in fact positive models, those last four.
Yes, I haven't seen any of those shows either, and it is interesting that when we hear the word Homer Simpson, we've all seen that, and when we hear the last four shows, you and I, who keep a lot of track of the world a great deal, have not are not familiar with any of those four, and some one or two I've heard of, but never watched any of them.
What is really most bothersome to me about the boy crisis is education. That around the world, more women are graduating from university, except in sub-Saharan Africa, going on to graduate school, which is the pipeline for professional and leadership positions. So I wondered what's going on, because it used to be that they said, oh no, school favors boys, teachers encourage boys more, but there was some kind of shift, and now boys aren't going on to college as much. What's happening?
Yes, well, it used to be when I grew up, boys were oftentimes, filled with fun and games and fooling and around and being not so good at school until about 11th grade. And then about 11th grade, the message went out like, girls aren't going to be interested in you unless you're a breadwinner and successful. You're not going to feel good about yourself unless you are. Mom and dad expect you to go to a good college and a good university. You'd better damn well get your act together. And then boys often around 11th grade, all right, blankety blank. They got their act together in 11th grade, and that's the year that the college admissions people looked at and saw, all right, he's really changed and he's ready for college material. Nowadays, that is not the case anymore. The boys are much more likely in dad-deprived situations to not have that boundary enforcement. Girls are much more. The good news is we're encouraging our daughters to be whoever they want to be, to become powerful. I always have, always will support that. And so we're giving enormous encouragement for girls to be whoever they want to be. And in the professions where girls and women are in short supply, like the STEM professions, we're giving scholarships all over the place. But in professions where boys are less likely to be involved, like nursing and healthcare professions, or just being full-time parents, we are not giving them encouragement or scholarships in the males entering the female type professions. And we're cutting back on vocational education. We're cutting back on recess. Even the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, explains that after a minimum amount of studying, every 5-10 minute interval of being physical really allows both boys and girls to do better at studying and on their exams than not being physical. And especially boys are an enormous need to be physically active before they can focus and concentrate. And so we have a huge amount of issues like this. We have studies that I talk about in the Boy Crisis where when a teacher evaluates an essay and doesn't know that it's a boy or a girl writing it, they evaluate it one way. But if they 30% of the time when they know it's a boy writing the essay, they evaluate it lower than the essay from the girl. And so we have enormous amounts of the messages that I talked about before in school about the future is female, that that enthusiasm you show. Well, wait a minute, you speak up later. You just dominated the conversation. There's hundreds of messages boys are seeing and feeling in school that school is not for them. That playing dodgeball, playing tag, the exchange of wood-covered put-downs, which is very male stuff. The commerce of male adolescence is the trading of wood-covered put-downs. No one that I have ever talked to who's a teacher understands what the purpose of wood-covered put-downs are. And I explain this in much greater depth in the Boy Crisis, but just in brief, boys learned that when they trusted other boys, when they respected them, they would test out their ability to handle personal criticism by giving them put-downs. That handling of personal criticism is a prerequisite to success. No one becomes successful without being able to handle personal criticism. But boys don't explain this. They don't even know why they do this. It's just probably epigenetically transferred from male to male to male. But you're at a workplace and you start respecting a male, and you think about him as being somebody who's your real peer. Let's say you're a firefighter, and you'll put him down for whatever reason you can. Your shirt looks really great this morning. Did you wake up in the dark and use the shirt you wore last month and last week and yesterday? And your smell is pretty good too. This is male behavior. Well, if he said that, he would only say that to another male when he began to sort of consider that male as a peer. But if he said that type of thing to a female, he could expect to be reported to HR as somebody who was discriminating against her. And so there's this enormous gap between our understanding what male behavior is and what its purpose is, and then if we understand what its purpose is, to be able then to intervene and say, here's where that purpose has gone too far. Here's where you've overstepped your bounds. Here's where you became cruel rather than just did a wood-covered put-down. Here's what you have to observe about body language as to who's willing to handle that, who's willing not to handle that. These are all any virtue taken to its extreme becomes a vice. And so, but what we're not doing in human resources is to have this dialogue about the difference between the male intent in doing the wood-covered put-downs, which was this intent is to honor this person as a real peer, not to put the person down and to disregard them. But from the female perspective, this can very easily and legitimately seem like a put-down that's part of discrimination. What needs to happen? Not a law that kicks the man out when a woman complains about him, but a dialogue between the man and woman so that the value systems and the differences in the best intent of both are understood.
Another thing that's really disturbing to me is the rates of teen anxiety and depression have gone way up. And the studies show, especially for girls. Do you think that's because the boys don't talk about it? And why do you think the rates have gone up?
I think that there's two reasons. One is social media seems to have an impact on girls more powerfully than it does on boys. And the studies that I've seen sort of suggest that girls see that girls all post what they're looking good, doing great, everything is fine, and then they're more likely to be in touch with their own feelings and feel like, well, I don't feel so fine. I feel a little depressed, and I don't feel so good, and I didn't achieve this, I didn't achieve that. And so, and then the social media can often lead them to be a little depressed and fearful of sharing what's going on inside of them that they don't feel good about. That said, girls are also much more likely to be able to share the feelings and fears that they have with 1, 2, 3, or 4 other girlfriends. But sometimes the social media will sort of like deflate that as well underneath. When boys and girls break up, the surprising data is when you start looking at the way boys express depression and feelings of suicide and so on, is boys suffer quite a bit more from breaking up from a long-term relationship with girls than girls do with boys, even a short-term relationship in which the boy considers himself having been in love with the girl. Once a boy goes beyond the second or third date and begins to sexual feelings turn into a wide range of feelings, and the boy feels like he can speak up and say what he really feels to a girl that really is listening, because boys don't hear each other very well, and the boy becomes often more dependent on those girls' feelings and her empathy than girls do with other girls. When girls break up with a boy, oftentimes they'll tell the other girls that they broke up, and the girls will say, the way that girls will support the girls will say, I never wanted to say this to you, when you were dating Jimmy, but Jimmy is really kind of, you're worthy of somebody better than Jimmy. And besides, Jimmy was at a party with a bunch of us a few weeks ago, and he was flirting with Mary, and so you don't really want a guy like that, and besides, he has this deficiency, that deficiency. This is a door that's opened up for you, sweetie. You go ahead and pursue the door. Be happy that you broke up with him, and definitely don't get back together with him again. Well, by the end of the process, in some ways she feels unheard, and in some ways she feels like, okay, this is a new opportunity for me. Whereas boys are much more likely to give the boyfriend, the other guy that says something like this, about 30 seconds to 3 minutes worth of hearing, change the topic and say, let's go play basketball, not bring the topic back up again. And the boy will feel lonely and isolated and not able to fully share his vulnerabilities. And if he does start sharing the things that he found troubling in the relationship, boys are much less likely to give the boy space to just vent. They're more likely to say, well, how are you responsible? What did you do? Be accountable here. And then also, as you said, let's solve this problem. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Well, that's, girls have a much better instinct about what people need when they're in grief mode. And what they need first is to be heard. And then after that, they need to be heard. And then after that, there's a space for more complex sharings of feelings.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that boys commit suicide more often than girls actually commit it simply because they have access to weapons like guns? Or is there another reason that I think the old statistics were girls tried more, but boys succeeded more at suicide?
Yes, the boys do succeed more at suicide, but I think it would be a real insult to girls to say that a girl, most people who kill themselves with a gun, kill themselves with a gun that's in their family, in their home, unlocked, or they know access to their they know where the key is, they know what the access to the safe is. 24,000 deaths by suicide with guns happen each year in the United States. Most of those are by males. I think it's an enormous insult to say that girls are not intelligent enough to find that gun as boys are. Girls are every bit as intelligent as boys. But the purpose of suicide done male style is very different than the purpose of attempting suicide female style. So when a girl who is still more likely to attempt suicide suicide.
That's a cry for help.
That's a cry for help, but it's a cry for help within the framework of her feeling that there are people in her life who will A, listen, and B, who could be there for her, and so who's caring about her is on the back burner. But if she does something dramatic, they will take the feelings they have about her off the back burner and pay attention to her. So she needs to just do something that is significant, like maybe cutting, like shooting herself in off center, taking a knife, taking pills. Usually, pills is the female style of doing it, overdosing, but not enough to kill herself. Only enough to call attention to the fact that she's needing help. And so the attempted suicide is usually a statement that the female has a support system that is not paying enough attention, but could pay enough attention if her need is spoken quickly enough or emphatically enough. The boy feels, and in the Boy Crisis book, I have 63 red flags of depression or suicide, an inventory that really, I believe, every boy and girl should be given in school, that taps into the male style and the male impetuses for committing suicide. A few of those, for example, is, do you feel that nobody needs you? Do you feel that no one loves you? Do you feel that there's no hope of that changing? Do you feel that if you were to express that to your feelings and your fears to someone that you do know that is competent, they would in fact lose respect for you? Are you Caucasian? Are you Native American? Caucasians and Native Americans kill themselves by suicide. Blacks do it by killing each other, or they get involved in activities that are likely to end their life when they feel they have nothing better to do. But males, particularly males who are Caucasian, in the middle and upper middle class, have expectations on them. Your sister went to college. You dropped out of high school. We sent you to a private school. You dropped out of that too. You didn't do this well enough. You went into college and you dropped out of college. Or you're getting C's and D's. Your brother is getting A's and B's. So the expectations of middle and upper middle class white people, Caucasian people, the family's expectations tend to be much greater than they are in the black community, and therefore the boys are more likely to feel that they're failures, feel ashamed of themselves, and then if that combines with the other 61 flags of I said 63 before because I've just covered the Caucasian and Native American are two of those flags. If you have the other 61 flags of red flags of depression and suicide, those are so crucial for your son to take that inventory along with your daughter. So you're alerted to these. When boys take this inventory, one of the things that happens for them is they say, "Oh, I didn't even realize that this was. If this is on this inventory, it must be that other boys are also experiencing these same fears. Therefore, I'm not alone." And that alone begins to make the boy feel less alone.
Another interesting change besides the rates of anxiety and depression is about a third of teens are gender questioning. I just finished a book about climate girls changing our world and just heard from two of them that they decided they're non-binary. So what do you think is going on with kids who are questioning trans, non-binary, really rethinking gender?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that we have a world in which there's permission to rethink gender. I think, though, whenever every virtue taken to its extreme can become a vice, and every virtue that becomes a fad can become very dangerous if changes are made in order to be popular or in order to stand out, that cannot be reversed. So if somebody wants to do something when they're in school that is reversible, that is, it's not going to be likely to kill them, not going to be likely to change their hormones in such a way that is not reversed, and get surgery that can't be reversed, I think then that is to create a society where there's social permission or pressure on parents to allow a young boy or girl to change to become transsexual, or even partially transsexual, without until they're 25 if they're a male, or until they're 23 or so with their female. As we know, the male brain doesn't develop fully until they're he's about 25 and the female about 23. And so we really need to make sure that we aren't assisting our children to make life-changing decisions that cannot be reversed until they're old enough and mature enough to say, you know something, I felt like I really am a girl, but in a male body. I'm now 25, 26. I have a little bit more wisdom, a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more about my priorities, and I'm still feeling this way. And then seek help to do that constructively, and vice versa. But don't do this when because the one kid in school that did do this is getting a lot of attention and a lot of empathy, and is now the new hero in a different way, and you want to be in that little select group.
So you think it's kind of a fad?
Well, I think it's both a fad and social permission. Everything that is new is many things that are new, like being able to consider yourself beyond male and female. I think whenever you want options in your life, you should be able to pursue those options. But don't. So that's the good news. The bad news is when something becomes so much a part of social permission that parents feel pressure to not help their children differentiate between what's a temporary desire because it's popular versus what may be their desire in the long run. And then the children will turn back, I predict, to the parents, angry at the parents if they make a decision that they later feel regretful about, that the parents didn't prevent them from making that decision or postpone them making that decision until later in their life.
Let's talk about
Gail,
the men's.
Gail, I have another interview at the turn of the hour, and I'm afraid that I'm going to need to rest my voice a little bit. So maybe if we could just do a few more moments.
Okay, men's movement. When I talked to Gordon Clay, he said he thought the mythopoetic men's movement today, the warriors who go in the woods and discover their inner masculine, a la Robert Bly, that they're the largest movement. What are you seeing in terms of the men's movement? And especially I'm interested in what young men are gravitating to in terms of organizing, because I don't hear much about that.
No, first of all, there's barely a men's movement, and yes, there is the Mankind Project is probably numbers wise fairly well, maybe the largest part of the men's movement. There's the men's rights people who are more they are more sort of adamant that men have been left out of being considered for rights like having the right to be equally involved with their children after divorce. Some of the people in the men's rights movement are so hurt and angry and feel that whenever they speak up, they're not heard. They're just classified as haters. So they've withdrawn, like the Men Go Their Own Way group, which is MGTOW, or the incels, which are involuntary celibates. And so they don't want to be celibate, but they just see no hope in a world that is able to hear what they have to say. And then there are people who are equal parenting people who feel that children need their fathers, and that can be thought of as a children's rights to parent, both parents group, or it can be considered a father's rights group, that the fathers have the right to the children and the children have the right to their fathers. In the long run, that's, I think, the most constructive and most important single group of people looking out for boys and men's issues. Then there are people like myself who wrote books like The Boy Crisis and The Myth of Male Power that are saying that there's 20, 30, 40 men's issues that really need to be dealt with. We need to understand why our sons are falling so far behind our daughters in more than 50 different developmental areas, that this is not good for our sons, it's not good for our daughters, because our daughters want functional boys who will become functional fathers and functional men. Women do not fall in love with losers. When men are losing, women therefore are also losing. And so that's where I come. As you know, I'm I consider myself a gender liberation advocate. But at this point in history, I feel that gender liberation we've succeeded a lot more with women than with men, and we've demonized men in a way that's harmful to both women and to men. So that's been my fight.
Do you have another book in the offing, and then I'll let you go?
Yes, I have a book, two things in the offing. One is a couples communication Zoom course that I'm doing both on my own and also doing another course with Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, which I will be requiring myself and Esalen to distribute that course, in addition to selling it, to distribute it to poor communities so that parents will not have to pay for a therapist to be able to have a way of being able to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And then I'm also updating The Myth of Male Power. I'll be calling that The Paradox of Male Power.
Okay. Thank you.
It's real